Well, wouldn't you know it? North Korea, well, they did it again, conducting yet another missile test this week. This time, they tested a new type of anti-ship missile, at least they claim that. And this came just days after the aircraft carriers USS Carl Vinson and USS Ronald Reagan left the region, following those joint exercises with the South Korean military. Well, the North claimed those land-to-ship missiles were fired from the city of Wonsan, that they successfully, they say, hit some floating targets at sea. Those targets, yep, intended to represent our ships. So will Kim Jong Un ever stop, and what will take him to stop, if anything? Frank Lavin knows. He's the author of this terrific book, Homefront to Battlefront, an Ohio teenager in World War II, about his father. He's also the CEO for Export Now and former U.S. ambassador to Singapore under President George W. Bush, so he has a lot of experience in the region. And welcome back.
Thanks, Eric.
You live in Singapore, so welcome back here.
Good to be back.
I mean, what do we do? I mean, this is getting worse and worse.
Well, the behavior's chronic.
Chronic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he enjoys being provocative. He enjoys being assertive, and it's a deliberate jab at the U.S. because, as you observed, that's where the U.S. warships were. So the warships were there in response to his previous tests. He's now pushing back and saying, that doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not stopping or slowing down. So it is what it is.
Does it mean anything that they didn't fire the ship missile while our aircraft carriers were there?
It sure does. Look, they've got to be careful. It's one thing to be symbolically, active and showing strength. There's another thing to be reckless. If they accidentally hit a U.S. target or hit something in Japan, the U.S. would have to respond or Japan would have to respond. So they need to be a little bit prudent despite some of their bravado and their rhetoric. And I think it's wise of them to wait until the U.S. ships left the area.
And they haven't had a nuclear test, as was expected.
Correct. Well, my suspicion is China has delivered some kind of message. Now, whether it's adequate or will have lasting power, yet to be seen. But the U.S. has made very strong remonstration to China. I think China has made some kind of signal to North Korea, but we just don't know yet the lasting impact of that.
Do you think we actually have made progress on this issue? We've got more sanctions at the UN Security Council. Some, though, say that wasn't enough.
Yeah.
It didn't target enough. It wasn't broad enough. Do you have any good news on this front? That we actually are making some progress?
The trouble is we can only evaluate if there's good news after the fact. We only know sort of after the fact that say we've done enough. Look, the Trump administration has taken up the rhetoric, which I think is important. It has been effective in the UN, which is important. It has sent the right messages to China. So all of those are building blocks. Whether that's adequate or not, we only know weeks or months after the fact. And I think there's the prospect of more actions from the administration vis-a-vis China. For example, targeting firms in China that do business, sanctioning firms in China that do business with North Korea, putting global sanctions on these firms.
Would they actually do that? I mean, even if Beijing would anger Beijing?
Yeah, I think we would, but I think it's important that the administration undertake signals first, undertake a warning process first, and let Beijing know, look, we're going to start this in 30 days or 60 days. Unless you shut it down, we're going to work to shut it down.
We've been talking about Beijing and the coal exports that they say that have been basically stopped, and the trade. Now you got Russia. You got Vladimir Putin to worry about, believe it or not.
Right.
I mean, they're moving in.
Yeah. Well, Putin enjoys taking advantage of any opportunity to wrongfoot the U.S. He enjoys that, and there's no doubt in my mind that if there's an opportunity to support North Korea and send them a quiet message, he's going to do that.
Here's what USA Today said about this, basically saying that the Russians can kind of backfill if China does cooperate. A larger Russian trade relationship with North Korea could negate some of that, what China may do. A regular oil tanker ship traffic between Russia and North Korea, who knew, and the rail line that's being repaired are evidence that Russia could replace some Chinese oil supplies. Russia could cause mischief in North Korea for the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. Could cause. If they're moving in now, Putin already is.
Oh, yeah. I think there's no doubt that they're going to. Look, it would mitigate at least some of what the U.S. is doing, some of the Chinese moves. And Putin enjoys wrong-footing the U.S. There's no doubt in my mind that's part of his motivation.
So Kim Jong Un's strategy, I mean, he just continues to be provocative.
Sure.
And get right up to the line.
Yeah.
Do you see a day when and if, how is this resolved? Can it be in any true manner?
Look, he's got a number of structural problems in his economy, but we know this regime can survive even significant economic downturn. But I do think it inhibits him and it constrains to some extent. So a lot of what he's doing is bravado, I think, that he doesn't really intend to go the next step and directly threaten South Korea, Japan, or the U.S. militarily. But he always wants to be cheeky. He always wants to be assertive. He always wants to step on our toes. And it's important that we find the right ways to push back. I think sending the two carriers decision after the last test was exactly the right way. I think you have to sort of match shove for shove, so to speak, and not let him think that he is setting the pace or setting the course.
So finally, you're saying the Trump administration is basically handling this correctly?
I think so far so good. You have to show strength, you have to show resolve, you have to work with your allies, you have to send the right message to China. I think so far so good.
All right, Frank Lavin, former ambassador to Singapore from our great nation, who lives in that region. Thank you for coming to the studio.
Thank you.
Good to see you.